Welcome to New Ulm Quartzite Quarries.
Fire in the hole!
The Quartzite Quarries are situated on the eastern edge of New Ulm in NUQQ County, Minnesota, 75 miles southwest of Minneapolis. It's believed that operations first began around 1861, making it possibly the oldest business in New Ulm. The New Ulm Quarry had been a source of railroad ballast since the mid-1800s. Railroad ballast is the material used to create a flat bed for the railroad tracks. In the old days, 100 tons a day by perhaps as many as 50 men was a good day's production. Of course, you were ready for retirement by the age of 38. Quartzite is a rock consisting of quartz sandstone thoroughly cemented with silica. It's distinguished from sandstone by its vitreous appearance and by its hardness. Quartzite cannot be scratched, even with a knife. The purple to pink color typical of the Minnesota Sioux quartzites is due to trace amounts of hematite, an oxide of iron. There were many would-be quarry moguls in the early part of the 20th century. None could make it work, often walking away from the endeavor, leaving many broken men. The quarry was dormant for about 3 decades before reopening in 1956. When Ed Lundeen, a gravel contractor from Mankato, Minnesota, and George Karlstrom, a Mankato general contractor, founded the modern quarry company now known as New Ulm Quartzite Quarries. At this time, more modern, efficient, and heavy-duty crushing equipment made the newer 20th century company possible. Quarrying and aggregate processing operations have run continuously ever since. Many people don't realize this, but aggregate materials such as sand, gravel, and crushed stone are the most fundamental and indispensable component of our nation's physical infrastructure. They are the materials that provide the mass and strength of Portland cement concrete and bituminous pavements. Due to the precarious personal financial condition of Ed Lundeen, George Karlstrom bought full control of the company in 1958, and George's middle son, a young Brad Karlstrom, just 22 years old, took over day-to-day management of the quarry, along with Roger Tice, who was the original superintendent and held that job until retiring in 1991. Roger, a tougher-than-nails quarry superintendent, had begun his career as a truck driver for Ed Lundeen at the age of 19. In the early years, the quarry would produce and sell, on average, 65,000 tons of aggregate each year. In 1970, production and sales were just about 128,000 tons a year. Gradually, specifications for road construction required better aggregates. Coincidentally, sources of good local gravels began to deplete. Both occurrences made the New Ulm Quartzite Quarry a popular source of high-quality aggregates and a profitable business.
There you go.
Quartzite is extremely hard and nearly non-porous. Due to these natural properties, quartzite absorbs little or no moisture. Unlike highly absorptive aggregate, such as limestone, quartzite is resistant to breakdown from freezing and thawing activity. In states like Minnesota, where there's a high frequency of freeze-thaw occurrences, a non-absorptive aggregate such as quartzite will extend the life cycle of pavements, like those used in road construction. A paved roadway is made up of approximately 95% aggregate. 1 mile of a 4-lane highway uses 20,000 tons of rock and sand. 1983, a modern crushing plant was built to replace the older plant, originally built in 1956. Production and sales were increased to 158,000 tons a year. In 1992, Jeff Karlstrom took over the management of the quarry after the untimely death of Bradley Karlstrom. Jeff is Brad's nephew. Roman Seifert took over as superintendent in 1992 as well. Soon, hydraulic equipment replaced the older cable shovels. Newer, larger, more efficient haul trucks and modern drills replaced older, smaller equipment. Every citizen of Minnesota unknowingly uses about 55 pounds of aggregate per day to maintain roads, develop infrastructure, support building and construction projects, and in industrial applications. A new home uses on average 120 tons of aggregate. Due to its weight, aggregate cannot be economically transported long distances. Identifying local sources of aggregate is important. Aggregate resources are not uniformly distributed around the state. The location of an aggregate deposit depends on geology. When a resource has been identified, other factors like market demand and haul distance determine whether a deposit can serve as an economic source of aggregate materials. Aggregate has been or is currently being mined in all of the state's 87 counties. Today, there are an estimated 6,500 gravel pits and quarries in Minnesota. About 25% of the aggregate consumed each year in Minnesota is used for the construction or maintenance of the state's 134,000 miles of public roads. 25% for public works projects like dams, airports, and public buildings. 25% for private residential construction. And the remaining 25% for commercial building projects and industrial applications like concrete, asphalt, railroad ballast, and egg lime, among others. In 2000, production and sales at new Ulm Quartzite Quarries were in excess of 300,000 tons a year. In 2005, Andy Giesecke took over the superintendent's job from Roman Seifert. In 2010, production and sales were nearly 400,000 tons a year. Aggregate mining contributes mightily to the state's economy. More than 50 million tons of aggregate are mined each year in Minnesota at a value that exceeds $155 million. New Ulm Quartzite Quarries produces 4 different sizes of concrete aggregate, 6 sizes of bituminous aggregates, and manufactured sands, aggregate for concrete products such as precast building panels and concrete pipe, decorative landscape rock, riprap for erosion control. The Cherry Stone Grit Division was established in 1963. Bagging operations began that year in a newly constructed metal shed. A Gustavus College professor rendered the Cherry Stone logo, which is still in use today. As poultry farms began to consolidate in the 1970s, it was discovered that bagged grit was used more and more for traction on ice and snow. New Ulm Quartzite Quarries, Inc. is the second largest manufacturer of crystalline mineral poultry grit in the United States, and bags and distributes the grit under the brand name Cherry Stone. The grit is also sold as a traction agent on ice and snow. In 1998, Cherry Stone traction grit was introduced in 25-pound plastic bags. The quarries have had a long and remarkable history. However, although once plentiful, aggregate materials are a finite natural resource. As Minnesota's population expands, aggregate sources are diminishing. Resource depletion is further exacerbated by conflicts between aggregate mining and other land uses. Thanks for joining us on this tour of the new Ulm Quartzite Quarries.